So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome everyone. Can everyone chime in where you are right now? And so my name is Lata Punamali. I am the chair of the Faculty of Management at the New School. And I curate and host the series, the Management and Social Justice Conversation Series. As some of your repeat attendees know, the goal of the event is to create a community of learning and practice where we can reimagine organizations and management as vehicles of social justice, equity, and inclusion. And this is the second event of this semester. And we had 12 conversational events last semester, and they're all available online as informal video recordings if you want to go view them. And in this particular panel, we are looking at cultures and specifically values. As we all know that organizational cultures can be very crucial and powerful in shaping behavior. So if you want to create organizations that are inclusive and just and center marginalized communities, we really need to think about how these organizational cultures operate and how the values get enacted. And as we know, there are also institutional and field level, that is the industry level cultures too that shape the behaviors. Say, for example, one of our colleagues at Parsons offers a class this semester on race and gender issues in built environments, that is like architecture and interior design and other spaces. So because each of these institutions or field level or industries have their own cultures. So if you look at the COVID situation, countries or national cultures which have privileged collective well-being and they're okay with masking have done much better than others that don't. And so values are a bedrock of cultures. And values are mostly about informal institutions. That is, formal institutions can enforce certain laws, but the informally, what's allowed, what's acceptable is driven by the bedrock of values that people operate on as a collective. And so in this particular panel, we have three presenters from three different continents who are looking at the gap between the espoused values and the institutional values in different industries. So our panel is going to be chaired by Donnie Repsher. And Donnie is actually a New School alum. He has a master's in nonprofit management, and he's an expert in development and communication specialist. And he's deeply committed to improving innovation and transformational justice in the nonprofit sector. And he specializes in social justice and management. He has 6 years of experience in development and communications for New York City art organizations. And he also has a decade of working experience in the hospitality industry. So a couple of housekeeping instructions before we go to the presentations. We are inviting submissions of papers and proposals for the second series, which will start in fall 21. All scholarly papers will be peer-reviewed and provided opportunities for journal publication and book chapters. We also invite panels for proposals for panels like practitioners and workshops. And this session is recorded. Please use the chat for talking with panelists and among each other, but use the Q&A option for posing questions because that we will monitor very closely. And so over to you, Donnie. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm looking forward to a great session.
Thank you, Latha. I am really grateful for this opportunity to facilitate this discussion and present work today in conversation with Somaya and Alicia. And thank you to everyone watching. We really appreciate your time today. So before we get started, I wanted to map out how we'll move through the panel discussion this morning. Today, we're presenting three pretty distinct entry points into this conversation about organizational values and moving towards closing that gap in our operations. So before we present our own research, I thought we might begin by introducing ourselves and how we each came to this work, which hopefully might begin to frame how these presentations live in conversation with one another. And then we'll move on to presenting our research, and we'll come back together at the end for the Q&A discussion. So I can begin. My name is Donnie Repsher. As Latha mentioned, my pronouns are he, him, his. I'm speaking to you from San Diego, California, on the ancestral homeland of the Kumeyaay Nation. I'm a professional fundraiser. I've spent the last 6 years working for 2 performing arts organizations in New York City. A recent alum of the Milano School, graduating in December of 2009 with a Master's of Science in Nonprofit Management. I'm also a freelance writer. The research I'm presenting today began as my culminating thesis project, having spent about a decade in and around the New York theater community as an actor, as an independent theater producer, and later as a professional fundraiser for two mid-sized, predominantly white New York City performing arts institutions. I saw that there seemed to be a plain, unspoken, but very clear gap between the way the industry spoke about prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and practically how decisions were being made behind closed doors and how conversations moved through these organizations in still mostly homogenous spaces. And after doing some of my own research, especially in a moment when the country was navigating, one of the most divisive presidential administrations, I wanted to use this opportunity to turn that righteous finger around and write a piece directed squarely at colleagues like me, white, well-intended arts workers, about how we can begin to actually embody some of these values we espouse, sometimes in very targeted, strategic, and compartmentalized spaces. So that's me.
I'm Alicia. My pronouns are she, her, and right now I'm in Florida, but I attend Alliance Manchester Business School in the UK, but due to COVID, I am back in Florida where I grew up. I did my undergrad and master's at Stanford and focused on sociology and was really interested in anti-trafficking work. Due to unforeseen circumstances after college, I ended up working at Apple as a researcher for 3 years, not researching anti-trafficking work, but then I really learned about business's role in anti-trafficking and other human rights abuses. And I began to be really, really interested. So I started this PhD at Alliance Manchester Business School, never having taken a business class. So I've been learning a ton. The title of the studentship was Modern Day Slavery, Accountability in Supply Chain and Procurement Processes. It was like the dream of everything I wanted to learn. And the paper I'm presenting today is based on a case study that I did both for my PhD and also for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for their Accountability and Remedy Project. I'll tell you about it in my presentation. The rest of it, I'm going to say my presentation.
Hello everyone, and I hope you all are doing great. And I am Sumaya Khatun, and I am currently in Pakistan right now. And well, I am a business graduate and with a focus in healthcare management. And let me give you a little bit of a context of how I chose this topic that I'm going to present today and what really encouraged me to do so. Well, I have met so many students and I have met so many students, but from different study programs, from different universities, but I haven't seen anyone actually taking part in environment. They are actually, I have never seen any students who were actually taking part in environmental issues, like they weren't taking environmental issues into account. So mostly we're focused in getting a particular job, either in public sector or in private sector. And if they are want to start their own businesses, they are, they didn't seem to integrate any environmental sustainable, business models into it. So apparently I found them psychologically distracted by, finding a job or bringing in cash right after finishing school. And even if they are, and they think that and they are thinking to establish their own profitable businesses. So what really get me to do to work on this paper is that I because I really wanted to know why they are not taking any initiative into for making the environment sustainable. So I did this paper, and I will discuss more about it in my paper once we get into the presentation session. So I'm excited to share my paper with you all. Yes.
Thank you so much. And I think, Alicia, if you wanted to screen share, we can move into the presentation portion. Fabulous. So this is us again. This the title of this event, as you know, exploring the gap between espoused and institutionalized values in different industries. And if we can click the next slide, this is us. Yeah, let's begin. If Alicia, you wanted to kick us off.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia. I'm very excited to be in this panel and kicking it off. So the paper I am presenting today is called Theorizing Effective Remedy, Exploring the Root Cause Dimensions of Human Rights Abuse and Remediation. Now, as I said in my presentation, I'm currently in the final year, hopefully, of my PhD at the Business and Human Rights Catalyst of the Alliance Manchester Business School. And so my research, my doctoral research, focuses on access to remedy for business-related human rights abuses. So when a human rights abuse occurs, remedy aims to restore the right. So rights without remedy are really, just aspirational or abstract. And so the paper I'm presenting today is a conceptual paper, but it's inspired and draws on empirical data from a case study I conducted both for my PhD and also for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for their Accountability and Remedy project. And this project really aims to, dig deep into this idea of remedy in the context of business and human rights and see, what effective remedy actually looks like. So the project had 3 phases, and the first 2 phases focused on types of state remedy, and the third phase focused on non-state, non-judicial remedy. And that is the phase of the project which I supported. So I focus on non-state remedy. And when I began this research, one big gap issue that I saw was that even the newest approaches to remedy for business and human rights, they don't talk about addressing root causes. The UN guiding principles on business and human rights are, pretty much the gold standard, most widely accepted new framework for addressing business and human rights. And the third pillar of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights is the remedial pillar. So it establishes duties of states and responsibilities of corporations to provide remedy for human rights abuses that they have caused or been linked to. But in this whole remedial section, they never talk about addressing root causes. They do talk about, how remedy should prevent future abuses, but in terms of the deterrent factor of remedy rather than remedy that would address root causes. And thinking of this really, it really troubled me, like how can remedy be effective if we're not gonna even talk about the root causes? We're not even gonna try. And abuses, are just gonna keep happening if that's really the best we can do. So the proposition that begins my paper is that effective remedy goes beyond symptoms and singular cases to also aim to address root causes of abuses. And then the next question is how? How do you design remedy that aims to address root causes of abuses? So as I said, this paper is based on a case or driven by empirical data from a case study I conducted, and that case study was with the Fair Food Program. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Fair Food Program. The Fair Food Program is an ethical sourcing program founded and headquartered in Florida. The program covers 90% of the tomato farms in Florida, and Florida accounts for 90% of the winter tomato, so November through February, produced in the US. The program is an initiative of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, which is a human rights organization founded by migrant farm workers who've been fighting for farm workers' rights since the early 90s. The program operates within a paradigm they developed called worker-driven social responsibility. And within the worker-driven social responsibility paradigm of the Fair Food Program, participating brands that you can see here, like Walmart, Subway, Taco Bell, McDonald's, big brands, they sign a legally binding agreement with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers that says they'll only purchase Fair Food Program crops from Fair Food certified growers who have been determined by an independent monitoring organization to comply with the Fair Food Code of Conduct. And the Fair Food Code of Conduct is a list of standards that were designed by the farm workers of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, so they address actual farm workers. Now, in these agreements, these brands also agree to pay a penny extra per pound that goes directly to the, or per penny per pound of tomatoes that they buy that goes directly to the farm workers who pick the tomatoes. So worker-driven social responsibility is an approach to business and human rights that empowers and protects farm workers or workers to monitor and enforce their own human rights. and is driven by market enforcement. And this driven by market enforcement really distinguishes it from other social responsibility programs where, if a violation is found in those programs, worst case scenario, maybe you lose certification or you lose a sticker. But in worker-driven social responsibility, if a violation is found and investigated, that farm can no longer lose his business. He can no longer, or she can no longer sell their tomatoes to participating brands who have take up a lot of their business, and they've agreed not to buy from farms who don't comply with the Fair Food Code of Conduct. The Fair Food Program actors, they like to say that they've made human rights issues business issues, and now businesses are listening. So the Fair Food Program, unlike mainstream approaches to root causes, the mission of the Fair Food Program is actually to eliminate root causes of farm worker injustice in the field. So it's not even that they just talk about root causes, it's really core to the being of the program. And so when I was analyzing my data, I was really looking to see how they did this. And one of the first themes that emerged was the dehumanization of farm workers. And if farm workers are dehumanized, they're not considered humans, they're not possessing human rights, and they're going to suffer human rights abuses. And the dehumanization of farm workers, it goes back to slavery, where farm workers were actually bought and sold as the property of the growers. And it continues today. There's this really infamous quote from the Fair Food Program. From the very first season, one of the workers was speaking to his grower about negotiating higher wages. And the grower turned to him and said, a tractor doesn't tell a farmer how to run a farm, which is, really awful, but that really is how growers saw workers, and some still do today. And so I began to, really dig deep into this idea of dehumanization and humanization. And really, it's an issue of recognition, of not recognizing someone's humanity. So I was learning about, theories of recognition, and I stumbled upon this wonderful book called Redistribution or Recognition by Nancy Fraser and Axel Honneth. And in this book, Fraser is debating Honneth, and she claims that struggles for recognition are real, legitimate struggles for justice that need to be had. However, right now, in the moment we're living in, these struggles for recognition are displacing struggles for redistribution of economic injustice, which she argues are equally valid, that you need to have both. You can't have either or, and one cannot be reduced to the other, as Axel Honneth argues. And when I thought about this in the context of the program, it really made me think about the fair food premium, that extra penny per pound. And penny per pound was, the rallying cry that started the program. And fighting farmer poverty through the premium and through standards of the code that have nearly eliminated wage theft, which was rampant in the industry, is really core to the program. So, I was like, yeah, she's right. Humanization of farm workers is important, but also that needs to be alongside economic remedy. So then I did a deep dive into Fraser's work and philosophy and found she actually has 3 dimensions of justice, which she argues are analytically distinct, yet fundamentally intertwined. So they're, they are intertwined, but you need to think about them separately so that you can remediate all 3 dimensions. So first you have the cultural dimension, which is conceptualized by struggles of recognition. So that's where we see things like dehumanization of workers. Then you have the economic injustice, which is struggles for redistribution, which is where we see, farm worker poverty and wage theft. And then you see corresponding remedy, as in the fair food premium. And finally, you have the political dimension, which is conceptualized by struggles of representation. And this one is really interesting to think about because, farm workers, they do face political injustice, right? They're excluded in Florida from the Fair Labor Standards Act, which protects their right to organize and the right to receive overtime pay. Undocumented workers lack complete representation. They don't have any voice. And so they face, a lot of political injustice. So in my paper, I argue that this answers the how question. How do we design remedy to address root causes? By designing remedy within this framework that looks at the 3 dimensions of justice, rather than focusing on, singular issues or symptoms, or focusing on only one root cause. Remedy designed within this framework looks at the 3 dimensions, analytically distinct, yet fundamentally intertwined. Oh, my smile. Oh, here we go. So the Fair Food Program proclaims this is a new day for farm workers in which they can be free from forced labor, sexual assault, other farm worker issues, and are empowered and protected to monitor and enforce their own human rights. After this research, I proclaim this may be a new day for remedy. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to the other presentations and the discussion.
Thank you, Alicia. Before we move on, I just want to encourage all of our attendees to use the Q&A function in this in the Zoom chat. As questions arrive, we'll use this Q&A function to facilitate the discussion after all of the presentations. So as questions arise, please feel free to jot them down through there. Thank you. Somalia, do you want to kick us off?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Ronnie. There's something wrong with the computer. So first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Lata and everyone from the New School for organizing this incredible series, and also for giving us this opportunity, wonderful opportunity to present our work here. And I'm so delighted to be part of it. So first of all, I'm going to present this paper, which is on assessment of a student's knowledge and awareness towards environmental sustainability and eco-activism, and what factors are really motivating students and what inhibits their willingness. So apparently, I just wanted to give a little bit of a context. Why I choose this topic is that when I found students, they found them distracted by finding a job or bringing in a cash, just bringing in cash right after finishing their school, and how can they establish their own profitable businesses. So I thought to myself, why this type of mindset? And either is it because of lack of knowledge about environmental issues, or is about lack of knowledge of environmental sustainability. So and is this why they are not giving it a thought, or not giving this much importance that it deserves? So then I decided that I really need to work on this paper, and with this aim that I really need to bring students' attention to this side as well, and to make them realize that their actions matter, and their actions might bring change in making sustainable future. So that was the main aim of my studies. So let me share my screen first and see if it's all visible to everyone. Alicia, can you stop please sharing your screen? Thank you. Sorry, can you see my screen now? Is it visible to everyone? I hope so. And I hope you all can hear me well as well. Okay, great. So starting off with yes. So starting off with this brief sustainability introduction. Well, there are 3 dimensions of sustainability. We have, first one is economic sustainability, then we have environmental sustainability, and third we have social, which third one was added a little late into the dimensions of sustainability, but it is social sustainability. So economic sustainability and environmental sustainability, these 2 dimensions are basically strongly linked. As we bring advancement and innovative technologies into our operations, into our business models, we are not only maximizing our production, or efficiency, but we are also reducing pollution. We are also protecting biodiversity. We are also reducing climate change. So ultimately, it will not only help us in making our environment healthier, but as our environment become healthier, it is better for the provision of services as well. So with this said, environmental sustainability and eco-activism. This topic is an increasingly prevalent topic of discussion that triggers high level of interest in academia, but it hasn't gotten sufficient scholarly attention so far among students and academic consideration. And our educational institutions, they play significant role, as they are the since the schools contain wide range of students from different demographic backgrounds, from different socioeconomic backgrounds. So schools, as this study which was done among Chinese students, it suggests that students earlier environmental encounters through their education and their life standards basically significantly impact their commitment in eco-activism. And so the schools and the educational institutions, they have this great responsibility in environmental behavior development. And we're talking about behavior development, there are so many studies that has done, and they suggest that that generative environmental concerns at an early age is a strong predictor that they're strong predictor of their pro-environmental behavior in their adulthood. And there are also some studies that suggest that their contributions in the eco-activism activities on their campuses, this is also an indicator that they have this strong intention to do good for their good for the environment. And furthermore, subject majors can also likewise significantly impact their environmental behavior and attitudes. Then moving on to this, I try to gauge a student's standing at the moment with these questions. Like, I really wanted to know, like, are they familiar with the environmental sustainability concept? Are they familiar with eco-activism? What exactly it is, how important it is, and what are our what are our environmental issues at the moment, and how can we tackle with them? Then secondly, we have, are they aware about their school efforts? Are their schools putting enough efforts? Are they practicing sustainable practices and taking it as a main academic operations? And are they what are their school key concerns? And are they incorporating environmental sustainability courses into their curriculum? And either they are offering internships to the students who are interested in this dimension or not, or is there any eco-activism activity happening on the campus or not? Our students are engaging in it or not? Then thirdly, do students really consider themselves responsible for making change? And do they believe they might affect change in environmental protection, in economic development, and in social wellness? So, and the last thing that I try to find is that what are their motivations? What really is motivating them? What factors are motivating them? And is there any factors that are really acting as a barrier in their way if they wanted to become eco-activist? Then the courses, like the environmental and sustainability courses, I think they are essential and they are required to be taken, in order to accelerate the significance of the issues among the students, and as the environmental health and sustainability is a prime future challenge. So what I really think is that schools need to revise their policies. They really need to take their faculty and their staff on board, because they are the ones who really gonna identify the potential among the students, and they are the ones who really guide them through it. So, and the other thing is that the schools really should put more emphasis on their environmental sustainability needs, and they really need to incorporate environmental sustainability practices as their main academic in their main academic operations. And this will not only bring awareness, but it will also motivate the students. And then they secondly, with the students' perspective, students, it's great that they affirm that yes, they are responsible, they have this responsibility, and they really need to do this thing, and they have this responsibility to help make change in our environment. And they believe that they believe that their actions might bring change in environmental protection and societal issues. And the good thing is that they really express interest, that they really expressed willingness, that they really wanted to be eco activist, and they were really motivated. And usually their motivation usually coming from how well they are aware about the issues, and how the sense of community, how they really wanted to how they importantly wanted to do good or to improve the condition of their community. So, and the third thing is that practice what you preach. So they really believe in this thing, and they really wanted to um, uh, they think that be the change that that you want to see. So these things really motivate them. And the thing is, the factors that are acting as a barrier in this uh, the acting as a barrier for students to that factors that is stopping them to be taking part in such activities are the factors that sometimes time constraints and lack of knowledge, obviously, if they don't have enough knowledge. And so this thing also stops them. And the third thing is that fewer opportunities. So fewer opportunities, and these factors really is unmotivating for them, and they really stopping it from acting or taking part in eco-activism activities. Also, they didn't find any such activities on campuses. Mostly students didn't find such activities on campus. So the main problem is this, that if they are motivated, they think that they won't find enough encouragement, they won't find enough support or maybe guidance along the way. And they think that the majority didn't find internships and related to such, related to environmental sustainability initiatives. So they didn't find such internships as well. So we really need to develop a culture where students can explore any dimension, where students can easily, enter into any dimension, especially environmental sustainability. So they really need, we really need to develop this culture. And if they get immense support and guidance and encouragement along the way, so definitely it will help in making the environment sustainable, and it will good for everyone as well. So it will not only boost their confidence, but it will also help in making environment sustainable. So I think that not only our institutions, but also our, government, our businesses, our policymakers, our, uh, the people who are running the society, they really need to, they should enact policies and practices that are developed to, promote sustainability. So students can get, enough, they get enough choices and enough opportunities to, work for the community, work for the society, and work for the sustainable future as well. So I would like to finish on this art installation in Union Square in New York. And this clock basically counts down years, days, hours, minutes, seconds the Earth has left to take, action to stop global warming. So this climate clock is basically reminds everyone that just how perilously close we are to the brink, and it's a high time that we really need to take action to prevent effects of global warming from becoming irreversible. So with that said, thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to the other presentations and the questions at the end. Thank you so much. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you so much. Alicia's just going to take us back. Okay, cool. Thank you again. Hello, my name is Donnie. This The essay I'm presenting, Woke Supremacy, began as my culminating thesis project as I was graduating the Nonprofit Management Master's Program in December of 2019. It was published 2 months later in February of 2020. As I was working on this piece, my primary goal was to drive a wedge between white, progressive, well-intended arts workers and their woke identities, the fusion of which, based on my research and much of my own experience, has been causing, in my belief, the greatest obstruction to meaningful, embodied movement towards not only diversity, equity, and inclusion, but justice and collective liberation in our arts community. So just for context, that piece was published in February of 2020, and then, of course, shortly thereafter, our world changed. We saw a global pandemic halt the entire live performing arts industry, along with another inflection point in the movement for Black lives after the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, to mention only a few. So very quickly, over the course of the summer and early fall of 2020, some of my own research materials from this first piece, two in particular, Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist and Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, were becoming household fixtures, literally in people's Zoom backgrounds. So I felt that the mainstream cultural conversation was now working to drive this same wedge between white people and the comfort that they found in their allyship. And now that anti-racism was a word lodged very firmly in the cultural lexicon, in the same vein of identifying this gap between espoused and real institutional values, I wanted to take the next step to explore how the concept of anti-racism was showing up or not within our predominantly white institutions. So I would like to also hold in this conversation a follow-up piece, Anti-Racism in the Institution, which I'll highlight here. And then, of course, as we move into the Q&A portion of this panel discussion, we can explore in more detail as it pertains to our larger conversation. Next slide, please. So this first piece, Woke Supremacy, is informed by research in roughly two veins, looking at race theory from a historical perspective, Ibram Kendi, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Kimberly Crenshaw, alongside conversations about leadership and looking at it through the lens of increased racial awareness among white people, Peter Block, Robin DiAngelo, and Brene Brown. I think it's important to start by grounding this conversation in a historical perspective, in acknowledging how the history of management in this country is intrinsically tied to the history of racial oppression in the United States, and how those things come together to inform the structures of racism we're actively working to undo in our management systems in this moment. That when we talk about redressing systemic oppression, this work is not actually limited to your bad boss or your stubborn board, that it, in fact, there is a long interlacing racialized history of management that is actively being carried forward. The first American manager was a white man. The first accumulation of American the first accumulation of American capital was slave labor. The invention of a racial hierarchy justified his right to manage. And over the course of our history, management systems were designed to maintain a fundamental power imbalance with extraordinary efficiency. So there are these orthodoxies that have been professionalized and inherited and learned and then passed down through generations. That is what we're up against. And therefore, there is power held desperately, in fact, in culturally dominant, homogenous spaces. And unfortunately, it's that power that we're trying to name and begin to undo. And as Ibram Kendi names so often in his work, if you're not actively anti-racist, you are by default upholding racism. So then to put a point on this to keep moving forward, fundamentally, increasing diversity cannot be the goal in itself. Our institutions are highly functioning systems of oppression. When we talk about the work, it's not about increasing diversity, it's about resisting oppression. Next slide, please. So this second piece is pillared by the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, Eric Liu, and Tima Okun, and it's looking specifically at how power moves through organizations so that ultimately we can flip what I believe is now a historically insignificant paradigm of inclusion, this notion of giving seats at the table. What I want to highlight, thinking about these two essays together, is that it captures a dynamic I've found really useful in thinking about how all of this has practical application. That there are two types of work that I think need to be held up, but are spoken about interchangeably. One being the function of promoting greater diversity, equity, and inclusion. That work is action-oriented. There are metrics to measure its progress. It is about shaping external institutional systems and creating parity and fostering greater inclusion from the organizational perspective. It is functionally about looking outward. And I think I think of this as a tension wire because there must be equal and opposite forces holding this rope taut. The other side of that, of course, being anti-racism, which is the function of looking inward, exploring with increasing depth and clarity how we ourselves uphold and permit implicit and explicit racist behavior, how we opt into repeated patterns of white supremacy culture that perpetuate these systems. White people, we are quick to name that racism is systemic, but systemic is not an abstraction. And systemic doesn't mean it's outside of you or your control. Especially within an organizational context, it means that it's repeated behavior we participate in and forward actively. That it doesn't matter that you, the individual, are not a hiring manager at your organization, or you're not the decision maker on your team, or that you are in fact woke or well-intended. We must acknowledge how our power is proximity to power. It's white power tied to our white privilege, and therefore we must acknowledge complicity and transgression and clarify the roles we play in racialized frameworks. That this is the deeply personal, never-ending work that holds the other end of that line. And when you lose that tension, I believe, is when you start falling into, at best, performative allyship, and at worst, blind and misinformed and ultimately harmful action in the name of doing the work. Next slide, please. So I think striking this balance, holding equal importance to shaping external organizational systems through our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, while also doing the deeply personal work, acknowledging racial bias and our own blind spots in order to continue to decenter whiteness across our management systems and showing up as anti-racist colleagues, managers, team members, board members, etc. Because within the arts community, you're seeing now so many predominantly white institutions truly in fear of getting called out or losing their subscriber base or losing Black and brown artists who are threatening to withhold their participation from future work without some kind of acknowledgement and accountability and action. Out of fear of being subjected to all of that, we are watching institutions still scramble. And what a business is designed to do very well is generate action when and where it pleases. So we're seeing these institutions spring into action, hiring a member of the BIPOC community to hold a new designated leadership position on a board or staff, or creating a board-approved anti-racism statement that gets posted to your website or sent to thousands of people via email. But the trouble is that internally, it's all being strategized as PR. And if you pay attention on the inside of these scrambling institutions, it's very clear to see that this rope isn't being held up by the other end. All this to say, white people staying woke without waking up to their own fear-based, short-sighted, and ultimately harmful behavior is the damage that we will continue to see and holds still the greatest potential for harm. Next slide. So I could conclude with just about any quote from Adrienne Maree Brown's book, Emergent Strategy. Anyone here listening, if you don't own a copy, I really do encourage you to find one. It's a transformative work that speaks in so many ways to subverting these capitalistic, growth-oriented models so rooted in our business practices. It's a book about organizing in ways that are adaptive and relational, that are about alignment and interdependence, decentralized and transformational organization. But in her chapter on intentional adaptation, Adrienne Maree Brown says, many of us respond to change with fear or see it as a crisis. Often this is because we aren't clear or committed about our dream destination. So instead of moving towards anything in particular, we are in nonstop reaction. A first question to ask ourselves is, how do we practice increasing our ease with what is? Change is definitely going to happen. We will adapt to that change or we will become irrelevant. Thank you. You can click the next slide and we will now switch to the Q&A portion and we'll hold a moment as we move into gallery view. Okay, cool. So this is the informal discussion portion of the event. I'll kick us off with a question, and again, as questions arise, please feel free to use the Q&A function in the Zoom chat. Alicia, you mentioned this concept of dehumanization. One really sobering realization I've had is learning that organizations act in the interest of the business and the bottom line as opposed to the interest of the personnel, the human staff. And so, I think this sort of applies across the board. How do you envision we begin sort of closing this gap? Or is this a reconcilable notion? Will there ever be a bottom line incentive to, protecting human worth?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I'm sure some people may disagree with me, but for me, and I was thinking about it a lot when you were talking about your presentation and, these diversity initiatives that everyone is, all these companies and businesses are taking. And when you think about it, it's like, who is designing those initiatives? Like, are the people they're meant to protect designing them? No. The same goes with CSR and these protection mechanisms. Like, who is designing those? Who are they for? They're corporate design. They're for the corporations. And I think so, and that results in the dehumanization of workers because it's in this corporate framework. And so why worker-driven social responsibility, I think, is different and so powerful is because it is designed by the people it's supposed to protect. Like, the workers are the ones who are getting the standards, which when you think about it, it makes sense. Like, obviously, they know what they need. They know how to be treated like human. The corporation who's a million miles away, they don't know. The really white male cis, who are they to design these diversity, agreements? So I think by empowering the people who it's meant to protect, the humans who have been dehumanized, to say what they need to be declared human, to feel human, to be treated like human, is the only way for it to work. I think an outside standard setting body to say we're making you human by doing these actions is never going to actually work.
Yeah. I think it's so funny, you think like institutions are the intermediary between a community and they sort of take in resources from the community and return a service to the community. It is all about the community in which it serves, the human beings, and yet sort of in that process that you see the incentive model change and create harm. And so I think thinking about how we can continue to sort of operate within those structures as human beings, make sure we always understand sort of the why of how we are planted sort of so firmly, so rooted in the communities in which we operate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we have a question in the chat. Thank you so much. I'll read it. It's so this phenomenon of tensions between motivation, values, and institutional forces around sustainability initiatives is also noted when students leave the university and create startups and attempt to grow and scale. They have to struggle between holding on to their values and adopting that of VCs. How can universities better prepare students for the trade-offs of fundraising? Sumaya, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Well, first of all, universities really need to prepare their students to, work for their society and to make the environment sustainable, because it's a really prime, future challenge, and we really need to work for it. And on the other hand, students are, more focused on mostly students are more focused on their own needs, or they really wanted to work for grow their own businesses, grow their own profitable businesses. So we all really need to work for our society. And if universities support students and give them enough opportunities and provide them internships, and make if they get enough encouragement from the universities, and they really start thinking about to work for the community as well, with their whole willingness. And if they don't have if they don't really thinking about like from where they're gonna make their living and from where they can earn, but also they have this security that if they are working for the environment, but they have this financial stability from the other hand. They have the support from their institutions, and they get this help from their institutions and from the society, or wherever they are working or they wanted to work, wherever they. Yes.
Yeah, Sumaya, something that occurred to me in your presentation is, you talk about how one of your leading questions was about how, like, is it just lack of awareness about environmental sustainability initiatives, and I think about knowledge transfer, that these institutions, there is one step is sort of access to knowledge, and then the other step is sort of embodied action, you making that knowledge useful. And those feel like sometimes very distinct and non-linear functions within our institutions. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts about, opening this up to everyone, if you have thoughts about how we can make that one seamless process.
Well, first of all, what I really think is that if they are aware, if they are fully aware about the issues, if they take this as a it's really important that we really need to think about it. So mostly students weren't very much interested, or if they are interested, they have other issues, like other factors that are acting as a barrier, and they are not able to work on this thing. If they, first thing is that if they have the knowledge, and if they have the knowledge, and if they have if they are willing, so they will definitely take the initiatives, they will definitely go for the actions, and they go out and find options and opportunities. Or if there are any businesses that are that are supporting sustainability, so they will go out there and take part into such activities. But if they are not aware, and they are in their own bubble of we just wanted to get this job either in public sector or in private sector, and we just make our living, so that so this will not gonna happen if we are just if we are all thinking in our thinking for ourselves. So we are not able to work for our environment, and we can together solve these issues. Not any I think that it's a it's not an individual job, it's a collective. So we really need to work together. Students really students are our future leaders. Basically, they are the ones who who are going to run the future businesses. And so we don't have much time to waste, and we really need to make them aware that they have this great responsibility on their shoulders. They really need to learn more about it. How can they work for sustainable environment? How many opportunities are there? If they couldn't find any, so they really need to go out and talk to their institutions, their higher level authorities or policy makers, that they really need to work on this thing, and they really need fundings or anything like that, so they can work for it. And they have this idea, and they really wanted to do this thing. So I think if they are aware and they are willing, so these things can come together, and they can work for their community. And this willingness and this factor of this I have to do this thing, I've got this. So students really need to build this thing in them to work for the community and make the environment sustainable.
Yeah. So we have another question in the Q&A chat. It says, if you are in a predominantly white institution, and even the people in the seats are white or the majority, are there ways to create space if there are not the marginalized folks there to speak or create the policy? Referring to Alicia's point that the marginalized folks should have the voice, should have to voice a seat to create the policy. If there is a marginalized population at a predominantly white institution, and they don't want to participate for various reasons, feeling that they're teaching, feeling tired of doing the work, etc., what are suggestions for moving forward? Yeah, so I can kick that off. I worked for a predominantly white institution where it was you were watching white people white leaders in a very homogenous space address all of these questions. They were, they were watching the culture move in one particular direction and responding to what they thought, making sure that they weren't sort of falling behind. And so, what I found is that the why we were doing anything was pretty unclear. And, especially as a fundraiser, you're creating a lot of language, and especially in a moment where there is no performing arts, and it is such a vulnerable time for these institutions. It is how we are retaining our community and making sure that the lights stay on, throughout all of this, so that we can come back on the other side, a healthy, vibrant organization. It was, as fundraisers, we were looked to sort of start creating language about where we were headed. And, that it was in that moment where, there was sort of an impasse, because the staff felt like that vision forward should come from the leadership. And the leadership was like, well, you need to create the language, and so there was, we were passing the buck a little bit. And what was a little disheartening about that is, that it didn't seem like any of our actions were rooted in any formidable sort of why. There was no vision forward. There were no sort of values grounding the work that we were doing or the conversations that we were having. And so I think, just that always feels to me like a clear sort of starting point. If you find yourself in a predominantly white institution where there aren't, where you're in a culturally dominant space, I think just leading back to why are we doing this begins to sort of open up the conversation and begins to illuminate where there are discrepancies that you find. I'm curious to hear what anybody else thinks.
Nice. I also wanted to answer this question. It's a really nice question. As I mentioned in the policy point that I mentioned, that the institutions really need to, revise their policies. They really need to, take their faculties, their staffs on board, because I think that they play an important role as well, because they really need to identify the problems. And if they have, if as you said, that if there is a minority and they have any issues, and so they they have this comfortable level with their faculty or their staff, so they just simply go up to them and they just talk about it. And I think that your teachers, your faculty are the ones who really motivate you the most. And if you are for some reasons you are not feeling for the reason that you have mentioned, that you are not feeling like that, and but you have this you have this thing, you really wanted to do this thing, but you are but this thing not letting you do this thing. So you really need to speak to someone. You really need to go out, talk to your friends or the faculties, or there is someone on the campus or in the school. You really need to talk out, and you really need to solve this issue. Because if you are just you really need to participate. If you don't, I don't think so it's a win for the other side. So you really need to speak for yourself. You really need to go out and speak for yourself, so that when you speak, things will go fine and work for your work for you. I hope it answers.
And I'll just add one more. Yeah, it's such a good question, and something I think a lot of organizations struggle with. And I think, critically asking why you're doing this, but then also critically reflecting, like, why are you a predominantly white institution? Why are all these seats like for white? And really like looking in, like, Donnie said, and really like talking with each other. Like, I know it's uncomfortable to feel that way, but I think it's really important and essential if you want to actually move forward. And then once you have critically reflected on this and your desire and your genuine desire to really expand, then you can reach out to these marginalized groups. And I think also the way you reach out to these marginalized groups to ask them to come teach whoever is also really important, because if you're asking them for this an hour-long lecture at this time at this, like, they need to be able to like not be in a box that you've put them in, because this is just perpetuating what has been going on for so long. So you really need to share your critical reflections, share your like desire for growth and wanting to learn and teach, share with the rest of your group. And I think you'll find that people are more open to sharing than when you like tell someone exactly like what you want and when you want it. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And I think, you know, that, and this goes with organizing too. You know, you depend on allies, you need allies, but you also don't need allies taking the voice away from the workers. So it really needs to be like alongside, you know, and that's why, you know, worker driven. There are allies. The allies are so important in this program, like students and faith groups. I think during the talk about Boycott, which was the boycott that started the program, 10 or 12 universities in the US pulled their talk about contracts because students were protesting, but they're always protesting the voice of the workers. They're never taking over the campaign. And I think it's definitely a struggle, but I think it's really important to just be aware of the danger of things like that happening.
Yeah, thank you both. We have another question. Folks presenting each spoke to different motivators for holding true to values. I like Alicia's reference to Nancy Fraser's work on the multiple entry points to justice action or values in action. Somoya also spoke to the responsibilities of institutions like education spaces, helping young people and students retain motivation for eco-activism. Where in organizations or systems, leadership, HR, other types of bodies, do we embed the role of consistently providing and adapting, a la Marie Brown, all types of motivation for upholding fair work, humanistic, environmental, anti-racist, other values for their members? Where is this best located?
What do you think, Alicia? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think embedding is kind of the important word, because it can't just be, you know, in, you know, one policy or one department. It really needs to be throughout the organization. It needs to be really the ethos of the organization. And I think a lot is the actions, you know, alongside these policies you have, like, what does it actually mean? Who is actually there? So I think whenever you know, critically just think about and decide what you want the values of the organization to be, each value needs to be alongside both an action for how you're going to embody that value, monitoring how you're going to monitor that you're keeping accountable to that value, and then, you know, enforcement for when there are violations, like how are you going to remediate when you violated that value? Because I think that is the only way the values become more than just words or ideas that you have.
And I can pick up on that too. I think, you know, in the way that I'm thinking about it, you know, just also holding that rope, I think there are ways to embed all of these social justice imperatives within the organizational culture from an institutional perspective. There are, you know, you can always look at your policies to make sure that, you know, hiring practices are stay as sort of inclusive as possible, or, you know, ensuring that all of your staff gets trained, you know, in anti-racism or, you know, harm intervention. You know, I think from an organizational perspective, there are ways to ensure that you're protecting the interests of your employees. But then, you know, you talk about embedding this in organizational culture. The other half of that is the human element too. That, you know, that we are, as you both mentioned, staying, you know, adopting a radical sort of radical transparency, staying communicative to the people around you, the support you have around you, but then also knowing that, yeah, you don't have to do this alone, you know, that there are resources that you have access to sort of in all of these areas that you can use at your disposal. You know, Tima Okun has for instance, Tima Okun has a list of tenets of white supremacy culture. And, you know, it is paternalism and perfectionism and, you know, the worship of the written word. These very sort of core patterns that once you're aware, you see them showing up all the time. And for me, that has been a hugely important resource in taking a look at how all of this stuff manifests in a workday. You know, when you think about diversity, it's like, well, you know, I'm not a hiring manager, and so it doesn't really pertain to me. But then you take a look at something like this, and you see when, you're moving quickly because that is, the speed is like a value of the organization, and once you start looking at these, this is a framework, suddenly you're able to address it in real time, and it's, it facilitates that transparency and that allyship inside organizations. So Maria, do you have any thoughts here? Can we move on to the next?
Yeah, we really need to, ensure that the values are aligned with, to every, we really need to think like social sustainability. If we are working on environmental sustainability, we also need to, work on our social sustainability as well. And we really need to, make make this thing clear to everyone who's working over there, that this is our policies and this is our values. And if you think that there is something that is, irritating you, or is there something that you think that, this thing need to be changed, so you really need to, speak it and just, get it fixed. And it is very necessary, and we really need to, work on this thing, the anti-racist thing. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you. I'll move on to the next question from Octavia. I'm curious, thinking about all of these angles and challenges to management and leaders, but also as managers and leaders who are trying to make change, but maybe stuck because of institutional policies. Are there any situations you can share that showcase some strategies which have led to success stories? As a performing arts professional and a department within a larger institution, we are struggling to move the dial based on where our power lies. I'm happy to kick that off. So what I found really profound about both Adrienne Marie Brown's emergent strategy and also the book by Eric Liu called "You Are More Powerful Than You Think" is it's really taking a look at power and how it moves from a human perspective. That there are frameworks that we inherit about sort of how traditional power is rooted in a hierarchy, and I don't have any experience in higher education, which is very hierarchical, of course, and the sort of structures of power are so clear and defined. But what was so the shift in thinking that these two books share, I think, is thinking about how you have power. And you have a voice, and you can begin. It is not, it is not like the you versus the giant. There are ways where you can begin to sort of reframe this conversation throughout your day, throughout your convening spaces, and begin to build coalition within these traditional power structures. It's not I myself don't have a clear example of this because this work, we're all really trying to figure this out within my own institution. But I'm curious if either of you have thoughts on that or have seen something work.
I can give an example. I don't know that it's the example you're looking for, but it's an example I like to talk about of how the worker-driven social responsibility paradigm and fair food program got started, and kind of struggles the farm workers were facing. In the 90s, you have the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, and they're just a bunch of workers, and they are protecting farm workers' rights. And the way they're doing it is by they're holding all these boycotts and protests against the growers that they work for, to have better wages or better conditions. They uncovered like huge, really awful human trafficking cases of like workers chained up in the backs of trucks, and they ended up working with the authorities and got those cases prosecuted. So they were, making real changes, but they'd have these weekly discussions, and on one of the weekly discussions, they, were talking, and they said, even though they're, prosecuting these big cases, this, being not treated like a human, they're really poor wages, they're still, that still remains. And so what do we do about it? And they realized from talking to each other that the corporations on the top of the supply chain, they were pressuring the growers in this race to the bottom, because every time they talk to their growers, some of them they work for so long, they know them really well. they'd, say we need to be paid more. Their wages didn't increase over time, they actually decreased. And the growers, they would say, well, we can't pay you more because the buyers, they're paying us less and less. Our margins are so small, and obviously labor is the first place that gets cut, which is not right. But so the workers, then they decide like, okay, well now who has the power, right? If they have the power to drive down prices, then they also have and worsen our conditions, then they also have the power maybe to increase prices and, ensure better conditions. And so they decided they're also just really experts on organizing. Most of the workers come from Mexico, Haiti, and Guatemala, and have a lot of experience in political organizing. So they're really genius. And so they decided to first take on the fast food world, and they target one company at a time because that's the most effective way to organize. So the first boycott they did was against the Taco Bell boycott. I remember that boycott. I was 10 years old. And they were, and it was under the slogan, Taco Bell makes farm workers poor, like drawing really attention. They're making these farm workers poor. And the Taco Bell boycott, it lasted 5 years, which is just incredible that they did this for 5 years, but it worked. Taco Bell signed on. They are now paying farm workers a penny more per pound, which is the first ongoing payment from these brands directly to the workers. And it wasn't just Taco Bell that signed on, it was Yum Brands, who owns Taco Bell, so also KFC and Pizza Hut. And now I think they have, could be wrong, I think they have 15 signed agreements from huge brands that they've been able to flip the power. So I think it's about, critically analyzing where the power lies, how do you shift that power, and really thinking about how you can, because you can flip it. It's not easy, but you can. You just have to really see where the power is. Is it like directly above you, or is it above that? And then what is the most effective way to, get some redistribution of power?
Exactly. You really need to figure this thing out. And what I said, that the policies, institutions policies, they really need to, revise it. They really need to work on it, and they really need to, design it accordingly to the situation, what is happening. And we can see that this question is arising then if they are stuck because of the policies. So we really need to, the institutions and their businesses, our governments and everyone, they really need to, think about it in this way. And Disha, you really gave a really nice example of it. Really nice.
Great, and we have one last question in the Q&A. It says, does worker-driven social responsibility entail a transfer or redistribution of wealth across the corporation to target the inherent unequal distribution of wealth across corporations beyond the meeting of bare minimum rights? Or is this a form of empowerment that still allows similar capitalist exploitation to occur and keeps workers and corporate elite in their same places in the capitalist hierarchy?
This is a very good question, and something that, it's a very good question. I think worker-driven social responsibility, I call it a partial revolution, incremental revolution. I think this is how we start. This is like, and it does include redistribution through the fair food premium. It's an extra penny per pound, which does not seem like a lot. It is not a lot, but if you think about it relatively, workers, farm workers, they're paid usually per bucket of tomatoes they pick, and they're paid about 60 to 70% cents per 32-pound bucket of tomatoes. So a 32-cent increase to their wages per bucket is, significant. It usually works out to about $80 extra per week. There's still obviously massive inequality in the corporate supply chain. The Fair Food Program has also, they have standards of the code that have like almost eliminated wage theft, which wage theft was like really, really, really rampant in agriculture. So that has resulted in redistribution as well. But really, I think the biggest and most exciting to me is the redistribution of power. Because before, workers were completely voiceless, completely, like no one was listening. If anything ever happened, like if they were to report sexual assault, 80% of female farm workers suffer sexual assault, either verbal or physical. It's like really, really, really awful. And the retaliatory culture was so awful that workers, everyone says, you keep your head down, you don't say anything, because if you do, worst case scenario, you're gonna get fired. But with the program now, they have a no retaliation standard. And very importantly, their monitoring and enforcement of that standard is so seriously. They take it very seriously, because if that doesn't work, if that standard isn't enforced, if workers are afraid to use the hotline or talk to auditors, then the whole program falls apart, right? So they take the enforcement of that one really seriously. So now you have workers who are able to speak up and say something, and when they report an issue, things happen. People are suspended, people get put on a do not hire list, change really happens. So speaking to workers about it, for them, they're very happy about the extra money they're getting. They're very happy their wages aren't being stolen, but they're really happy to finally be able to, speak up and have a say about their workplace and about their well-being, which before was nothing. And so I kind of think that it's, definitely not breaking down everything yet, but I think this is how we're going to get there, is by empowering people at the bottom to be able to speak up, to be able to say something and take a tiny bit, even a penny, away from the corporations at the top. I think is a step in the right direction.
I am still thinking about the phrase incremental revolution. I think that's so profound, and to think about Octavia's question as well. That it's when I first thought about sort of thinking of an example of how any success stories. I think we are especially the performing arts, we are still very much, no one knows how we will all recover, and so you can say anything you want because there is no theater right now, but there have been, over the course of the past year, ways that operationally that there have been sort of incremental but profound changes in the way that information moves through the organization. That that now that there are conversations happening between our president and the staff throughout each department, and what that begins to open up is the president is now having conversations that is not just framed in the very sort of neat package that it's used to being framed in when we have all staff meetings, for instance. Suddenly that all of these strategies are sort of being interrogated and broken open just because we are now opening that conversation up directly to the staff. And so this idea of an incremental revolution is to me so profound, because it's like how the little wins sort of open up to long-term change. Wow.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, for me, accepting incremental revolution, I didn't do it at first because, in the beginning, it's kind of all or nothing, and if you don't, then you're selling out and you're just, but I think it is so important to see incremental revolution, but not, I think the danger is if you are complacent with how things, those incremental, oh, look what we did, and let's pat ourselves on the back because we have this. No, say you have that, and then what more do you, I think it's always looking forward, saying you have this, but what's next? What's next, I think, is the important in the success of incremental revolution. But that is a lot of the pushback that I get from talking about the program, is oh, well, you're saying Walmart's so great. I'm no, I'm not saying they're so great at all. I'm saying they did one good thing, and now let's see how that can be applied to other areas of the program. And I think taking that attitude is also how you're going to get things done. Also, if you see something someone did and you can acknowledge it and then say what's next instead of just brushing them off because they're awful, I think you're not going to move forward.
Yeah, and also just connecting this to the very first question about, within predominantly white spaces, when there aren't members of a marginalized community, what do you do? What are the strategies? I think, not being complacent is, thinking you always have to be aware of the gap. White people historically have always sort of sat in power, and so therefore there hasn't been any incentive to change, because they are there is a restorative they feel healed, they feel well, all of the systems are towards their benefit, and yet there is a community of people who are saying we are not being served in the same way. And so like really understanding, like centering those voices and centering that ideology then suddenly exposes like the distance you have to travel between where things are and where things need to be towards a just and collectively liberated community. And always be working towards that is your directional orientation, as opposed to saying, great, we made some change and some people benefited and we're done, because fatigue is a real thing. But I think it is always there always has to be movement in that direction.
Yeah, and I think the same, something that goes with like the sustainability discourse of either being complacent because you have this one program and then you're like, okay, I'm done now, I don't need to do anything else. But there's so much to do, and so I think but you also can't do everything at once. So I think by doing these small changes, recognizing what you've done, but then like seeing that as a step towards a goal that you'll never actually get there, but you just have to constantly be looking ahead as you slowly move.
And what I think is that the workers who are working in your company or in your organization, they are basically your main asset, and you really need to take care of them. If they are not happy for whatever reasons, if they are not happy and they're facing some issues or some problems, so you will I don't think so that you will reach to your goals, or you cannot reach where you wanted to take your organization or your business. So I think that it is very good initiative that they are very they can speak up and they can talk about it if they have any issues or any any problem if they are facing. So it's a really good thing that they can easily go up and speak out. So it's a really good initiative.
Great, thank you. I think if that's it, those are all of the questions. I think we can invite Latha back up, or whoever is supposed to close out this panel. But I do just want to take this opportunity to thank both of you for this conversation and for presenting your research, and again thank Latha for bringing us all together, and thank all of our attendees for being here and for sharing your time with us.
Yeah, and for listening our work. And I really want to thank all of you for putting this thing together, and it was really wonderful presenting with you guys. Thank you so much, Dr. Latha, and everyone.
So thank you, Alicia, Donnie, and Sumaya for sharing your research and perspectives. And it was such a great discussion. And I also want to thank everyone in the audience who joined us for this discussion. It is truly, I'm very lucky. I'm very fortunate and privileged to hold the space for all of us to get together and meet the need of the moment. Because there is definitely such hunger for this community and these issues, and a real genuine effort to make organizations, reimagine organizations differently. And we see that in this amazingly engaged group of attendees that show up every 2 weeks. I mean, it's a pretty intense conversation series. It's every 2 weeks, and we have such an engaged audience, great questions, great engagement. So thank you very much for joining us, and we will give you a heads up when the informal video recording gets posted. So we just recorded, and we don't unfortunately we're not in a position to do subtitles for accessibility yet, but the video recordings get posted. Please feel free to share that, and if you're a faculty member in management or business school and you want to use some of these recordings, I strongly encourage you to do that. This is kind of, even though we hosted, we see this as a collective community asset. And for March, we have a great lineup also. At noon Eastern on March 4th, which is a Thursday, we will host a dialogue on overcoming biases in management and social justice, conversations about race and ethnicity. Features two really excellent speakers with deep experience in this space. Nye Jones, who's a computer scientist by profession and a renowned DI leader by calling. She works at WSP, which is a multinational technology-centric company. and Jackie Odashkin, who's an OD consultant with very deep experience in LGBTQ and immigrant rights work. So please join us. And on March 17th, 11 a.m. Eastern, we will be hosting a research roundtable on human resource management policies, like continuing the same thread of conversation about how do we actually get these things done in the organization. One is to talk about theory, and the other is to how do we actually implement, where does it get embedded, and where does who actually is the owner of these things. And so we're looking at that in HR management and the role of HR in these things, which is a research panel on March 17th. So please keep an eye out for our email. So thank you very much for joining us once again, and look forward to seeing some or all of you again in March, and stay in touch. Submit if you are interested in being featured in the second series. So thank you very much, everybody. All right.